everyone, this is Heidi.
And this is Franny.
And tonight we have something super special for you. We're going to go through all the costs of the 308. We have a 1985 Ferrari 308 QV, and it's the European version of the car. There was a private collector named Harry Yagi. He's still around, still collecting cars, and he wanted to import this car into his private collection. In 1997, Harry sold the car, and a 15,000-mile service was done where they checked and adjusted the valves, replaced the timing belts and rollers, replaced spark plugs, replaced distributor caps and rotors, air filter, fuel filter, oil filter, transaxle gear lube, resealed distributor housing, replaced camshaft seals, flush brake fluid, flush coolant, replaced wiper blades.
Now that's a common service for 15,000 miles on the car. That's just a normal service for the car. So great that it was actually done. So that's pretty neat.
The car changed hands 2 more times, and every time the new owner got another major service done, very similar to what I just went through. In looking through the maintenance records, there were some other niggly little items that needed to get done. There were some hoses that needed to be replaced. The water pump was also redone at some point. And, you know, your typical oil changes and other items for your normal maintenance on the car got done as well. Even though the car was well maintained mechanically, there were some aesthetic issues that needed to be ironed out.
So in November of 2014 is when we entered the picture. So we had been kind of looking around for a car, and I contacted the service manager at Ferrari of Denver and said, do you know anybody who has a car, you know, that you would recommend that you thought might be a good car? And he did know of this car, and so he contacted the owner, and the owner was getting a little bit tired of it and had it for years and was pretty much ready to sell. But we wanted to do a little bit of a PPI on the car first, because I didn't really know much about Ferraris at all. So we took it to Ferrari of Denver and had them do a PPI on the car. They did, they checked all the, you know, the usual suspects, but they also did a compression test on the car, and it passed its compression test.
Right.
So at this point, we figured the car, it was running slightly rough, but I thought, well, maybe that's just dirty injectors and plugs and all that. But we went ahead and bought the car, and we bought it for $38,000.
Cars like this were going for about $50,000, probably about a $12,000 discount at that point.
And the guy seemed above board, and Ferrari of Denver had green-lighted the car, so
it wasn't for sale.
And so there was no reason for deception at that point either, anything like that. So we didn't think there was, you know, we weren't thinking along those lines. So the lower price, the interior needed a little bit of work. The engine was very dirty. The car wasn't pristine, and it wasn't perfect in any way. But we figured it was our one chance to kind of get in and to experience some Ferrari ownership. We had Porsches for the longest time. We just wanted something different. Sounded like fun. So that's what we did. So the previous owner had the car registered outside of the Denver area, which meant he didn't have to put the car through emissions.
Right.
So he was fine. It had it legally registered and everything was fine. It just hadn't been through emissions. And we thought, well, we can get it through emissions. How hard can it be? Well, so this is where our troubles began. So we took the car down to get it through emissions, and it failed. And it failed a couple of times. And I tried replacing the injectors and the plugs and just sort of do a quick tune-up on the engine to see if that's all it was. But it was at this point that we reached out to a really great shop, an independent shop in town called Maranello Motor Works, and talked to the guys down there, and they said, you know what, we've got an emissions place close to us, and for $100 we'll get the car through emissions, $125 or whatever, we'll get it through emissions.
Right, we're like sold.
We're like, that's awesome. So we took the car down and dropped it off down there, and the problem was that they couldn't get it to, they have a gas analyzer, and they could not get one of the banks, the forward bank, or in this car it's called the left bank, to really come around. The right bank they could adjust that, and they could actually see it change on the meter, but the front one just wasn't reacting at all. What we ended up doing was leaving the car with them, and it ended up being quite a process. So here's what happened. I'll kind of talk you through it, and then we'll get back to the finances. But they determined after doing several different things that there was one cylinder that they weren't happy with. It was number 8, so the far right cylinder. And they did a compression test, and it passed its compression test. And they thought for a little bit, and they thought, you know what, maybe we should do a leak down test. So they did, and then they found it.
Right.
So long story short, there were 2 bent exhaust valves on that number 8 cylinder. And I think what really happened was there was no contact with the pistons or any of that sort of stuff. Although this is a zero clearance engine, so if something was wonky, it would have nailed one of the valves. But the bend was actually at the top of the stem, which is strange, which makes me think that the valve guides themselves were just loose, and the just so loose that the valve actually wobbled around and managed to bend at the top. And so they were sticking. They wasn't like locked or screwed up, they were just sort of sticking. With those 2 bent exhaust valves, that meant we were in for an engine out service. So the boys at Maranello went ahead and pulled the engine out, and we knew we were going to have to pop both heads off. So they went ahead and popped the head off on the side that was giving us trouble. That's the forward bank. And that came off just fine. They were able to get it off, and we were able to look at it and inspect it and make sure the pistons were fine and that the engine was in good shape. And that's how we determined it was probably just a really bad valve guide. But since you're going to do one side, you really need to do the other side as well.
Right, because valve guides on the 308s typically, I think, start going bad around 60,000 miles. Is that right?
Yeah, they probably need to be done by then.
We're like, you know, we got one out. May as well consider doing the other one and just getting them both dealt with now. I mean, it was close to 50,000 miles. So that was one of the reasons why we decided to just do both.
Yeah, you absolutely have to, or you're going to have sort of an unbalanced engine. You got to do it anyways. You got the engine out. So great. So time to pull the other head off. Well, it did not want to come off. I mean, it really didn't want to come off. And it's kind of a long story with these QVs, but what happened was when the original engines on these cars were 2-valve engines, and so the heads were designed for that and everything was fine. And then what they did was they actually just built a QV, a 4-valve head, and stuck it on the same engine, which means they didn't move the studs. So the studs ended up in these weird places, in these little alcoves. So you can't put a tool on it, and you can't put a press on it to pull the head off and push down on the studs. So they clamped the engine to the floor and had a big crane pulling up on the top of that head. They tried everything. The problem is that the clearance for the studs is really tight on these engines, and all they have to do is corrode a small amount, and they corrosion lock themselves in. And I was a little worried that what they're going to end up doing was pulling some of the studs out of the case itself.
And that would have been even worse.
And that would have just caused a huge mess.
So then we had to start looking for another head if they were going to cut it off.
So they ended up cutting it off. So they cut it into 3 pieces, and half of it came off pretty easily, and they still struggled for another 6 hours. This is after 6 weeks of work, but another 6 hours just to get the last bit of head off that was only on 2 studs. That's how locked in it really was.
Tragic.
Oh, it was awful.
It was horrible.
Which meant we had to then source a new head from Eurospares out of England, because this is a European spec car. So at this point, we had both heads off, or at least we had our new head. The Eurospares shipped it over almost overnight, actually.
They did.
Yeah.
They did overnight it.
So then the 2 heads actually went out for service to California. And they spent a few weeks out there. Turns out they really did need some work. All the valve guides and seals, of course, were replaced, but we ended up replacing 12 valves that were out of spec. 12. All of the springs got replaced, every single one of them. None of them met spec.
No.
So then they went ahead
and we did it. I mean, it really is.
And they went ahead and did all the machining and such on the heads. So they came back. They were perfect. They were awesome. And as much of a hassle, much of a pain in the butt as it was definitely worth it to get it all done.
There was a lot of tears in that process.
There were. And the boys at Maranello were very upset about this as well. You know, having to cut a head up was terrible. But they had tried and tried and tried, and they were very patient.
I mean, this is one of the times that, you know, Franny does a ton of work on our cars. And I was actually, I mean, after this whole process, so glad that we had it at a shop and not doing it. I mean,
Yep, had professionals working on it.
Mind.
Yeah, it was crazy. We would have ended up taking it down there anyways.
We would
so
have.
it worked out really well.
Whatever.
So there's a lot of while you're in there. So if you got the engine out of the car, there's a lot of other stuff you want to do as well. So one of the things we got rebuilt was the warm-up regulator.
Right.
It's bespoke to this engine. It's a Bosch part, but it's bespoke to the Ferrari. So we sent that off to get that rebuilt. We also got the alternator and the starter rebuilt as well. We did that locally. You wouldn't believe what these parts look like. So this guy who owned it before lived on a dirt road, long dirt road. And the back engine, the whole back engine bay was completely brown. It was terrible.
It wasn't brown. It was, so if you've ever seen like Red Rocks,
it was that
color of the, I mean, the dirt around here is the Red Rocks, you know?
It's terrible, and it caked on everything.
Everything was this pink.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. So I was worried about the bearings in the alternator. The alternator was working fine. Same thing with the starter, but I thought, you know what? While you're in there. So we got that. So we got a full set of spark plug wires, new plugs. Let's see, what else did we do? We did a bunch of extra stuff on the car. Of course, new belts, new tensioners, and so both sets of belts, the timing belts and the accessory belts. Got those done, a full recharge on the AC system. There were a couple of other small bits here and there. Of course, all the gaskets and all the other kits, the distributor plate, that sort of thing, end gaskets. Holy cow, it was a lot of stuff.
They have all sorts of like special wiring and stuff that they can get that we had to buy as well.
And while you're in there, fuel lines, right? So we had the fuel lines replaced while we're in there. Might as well get that done. Some of the coolant lines in the back as well. We got those taken care of as well because, you know, the last thing you want is put the engine all back in and have something fail on you. And they replaced everything with OEM parts and the correct bits for the car, the correct clamps. Nothing was kind of crappily done. They did a beautiful job with it. It just looked great. The intake plenum on the top of the car is red, and it should be crinkle coated.
How many times did you paint that?
Oh, I painted it 3 times. It was awful. So during all this time,
it
was awful. It looked terrible. And then I finally got the crinkle coat stuff to kind of look okay and kind of work. And then I wanted to, it's the wrong color. It's kind of orangey. So then I went and sprayed it the correct color after it'd been, oh gosh. And then the whole thing messed up. So
it just looked like it was dripping.
It was terrible. So we ended up taking that down and getting it powder coated with a crinkle finish. And that was the smartest thing we could have done.
It was the right thing to do.
It was totally the right thing to do. It looks great. It's the right color. It's durable. Great. So that's kind of neat. Let's see, what else did we do? Oh, the CV booties on this car went bad. And so I replaced both the inner and outer booties on the car. And somebody had one of them off, I think, at one point, and they sort of half stripped some of the bolts, which was a real bummer. So I had to actually replace some of the bolts, and I had to cut some of them off. They were just frozen on there. Nice thing about the boots on this car is they're the same as the 3.2 Carrera. So I used the actual 3.2 Carrera kit to replace the boots, and was awesome.
Right.
Pulled them out, cleaned them really well, re-greased them, put them back on, and that was great. So at the end of all of this work at Maranello, they were able to easily take the car down and get it through emissions. It was great.
Right.
We also sourced an original Euro muffler for the car.
Right.
And I also got a full set of bushings for the suspension system, which we haven't installed yet, so stay tuned for that. That's coming up soon. We're going to go ahead and pull all 4 wheels off, then pull the suspension apart and do that. So that's coming up, so stay tuned for that. So after the car came back from Maranello, it was running perfectly. It just purred like a kitten. And so a Ferrari should be smooth all around. Everything should be completely smooth. The throttle, the engine, the brakes, the steering, everything should be like butter. And it was just humming. And so we started driving the car. It was great. Well, one night we went to, I think I was moving the car in the garage, and when I hit the brake, I heard this hissing noise. I was like, I think I know what that is. Turned out to be the brake booster had gone bad. So that's a big diaphragm in the center of it and must have a leak in it. So it's kind of a strange part. It's an American company that makes it, but it's a European version or an Italian version of it. So I think it's Bendix that makes it, but it's Italiano, Bendix Italiano. So we had to send it out to California again to get it rebuilt. While we had him working on it, we went ahead and had him also rebuild the brake master cylinder as well.
Yep.
Because they're iron, and if they had any water in the brake system, then they can rust. And so he went ahead and rebored that and cleaned it all up. So we had that rebuilt as well. Why not? You had it out anyways. It's attached to the brake booster. So from there on, the car was running great, and we turned sort of our sights on making it look a little bit better.
Right.
Because the interior was pretty tired looking.
We were finally driving it.
Yeah, we were driving it and going to club events and things with it, but it needed a little love.
Literally, from a timing perspective, we had purchased the car at the end of 2014, and it went to Maranello in 2015. We didn't have it back until November of 2015, so pretty much an entire year from when we bought it. And then the whole brake thing happened in the next spring.
Right.
So really, it was 2016 by then.
Yeah.
Right?
We had a few little dents removed.
Right.
We had the car, you can see we had the car ceramic coated and buffed, and it just looked gorgeous on the outside. We wanted to do a little work on the interior as well. So we had a guy come out, and I pulled the seats out and the door cards out and went ahead and sprayed those. Somewhere along the line in this car's life, somebody put a big stereo system in it and all that kind of crappy stuff. So I had to pull all of that out. I'm not a big fan of that sort of thing. I wanted to get a vintage head unit for the car and some speakers. They should be behind the door cards, and so I had to pull all that crap out and rebuild actually the original grills for this. So they're leather, perforated leather. I had to do all of that. Right. So after all that work was done, we had the guy come out and he resprayed the leather so it all matched, and that really brightened up the interior quite a bit.
Trying to get like the toolkit completed. I think I had to do some of that.
Yep.
I had to do some research on that. And so, I had to order some stuff from Scuderia Recumbi, and
the electric door locks that now work just fine didn't work, so I had to, one of them was completely melted, so I had to replace them. So little bits and odds and ends in the car to make it
the accelerator pedal cover.
Yep, accelerator pedal cover.
Euro spares too.
Yeah.
I mean, once we knew Euro spares existed.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't always have everything. Like, they have all the charts and diagrams, and if you're lucky, they might have your part. The total cost for the car, the private seller purchase and PPI, came to $38,763. Prior to the mechanical work at Maranello, $3,028. Once we got to Maranello Motorworks, $20,700. After Maranello, another $3,109. The total service and parts cost $26,837 for a grand total with the purchase price coming to $65,600.
That seems like an enormous amount of money.
It is an enormous amount of money.
But the car is actually worth more. In fact, the car went up while it was in the shop. It was worth more when it left. That covered the entire bill of it being in the shop.
Right. But in all fairness, if it wasn't for the engine work, so we spent $38,000 buying the car. The engine work itself was about $20,000, right?
Yeah. So
$20,000 above the engine, or above the purchase price, and then all these other things that we were doing ourselves were kind of niggly prices. I mean, we haven't. I mean, every year now we barely spend any money on it. I mean, it's just maintenance, like oil changes.
Once these cars are sorted, they're actually quite reliable.
Right.
I know that sounds crazy, but you have to remember something about these cars, and it also applies to the 3.2 Carreras and some of the older Porsches as well, is that these cars at one point in their life were pretty inexpensive. And so many people are like, oh, I just want a Ferrari. So they bought one. They didn't do the maintenance on it. They didn't do all the service on it. Now, this car was lucky in that they did do the belts, and we talked about that earlier.
Right.
That's the most important thing.
Oh, and our engine would have grenaded. I mean,
Yeah, we
I'm
would have lost the engine
thoroughly
if we
convinced
hadn't
that we
got it
hadn't
fixed.
done the emissions.
Yep.
So it's funny because a lot of people don't want to deal with emissions, and they'll, try to buck the system and register it somewhere else. And
Yep.
thankfully, we didn't do that.
So I'm glad we did it. I really am. The car runs great. It's a blast to drive.
It is.
It's reliable. I had to move it the other day. Just started right up.
Right.
We leave it on the tender in the winter, so that's why
Beautiful
we're.
sound with the
Yep.
European exhaust. It sounds wonderful.
It's just a great car to drive. It really is. I just love this thing. It's awesome.
It's going to be great.
It's super fun. So
we're still working on it slowly but surely.
yeah. Well, at any rate, so that is everything that we've done on the Ferrari and what we've spent on it. I hope you enjoyed the video.
Right.
It's a little nutty. I hope you've come to after that final amount. But any rate, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and questions or comments, I'm sure there'll be tons of them. Go ahead and put them down below and we'll get right to them.
And one other thing, so everybody always says, subscribe to the channel if you like the content. And one of the things that a lot of people do is they subscribe, but they don't realize that you need to actually hit the notification bell.
Yeah, there's this little bell.
So it's a little bell, and
hit.
you have to make sure it's highlighted. And I've had several people say, oh, I didn't realize that I need to do that. So make sure that you hit the notification bell, and then you will know as soon as we upload.
Yeah, and we try to upload a video a week. So,
Right.
well, thanks again, and a special thank you, as always, to our Patreon supporters.
Thank you.
All right, well, until next time, safe travels.
Bye.